Hello and welcome to a video where today we should be taking a look at learning new circuits or circuits that you don't know particularly well, and the circuit that we're going to be using for this video is Zandvoort, because funnily enough it's a circuit that I don't know particularly well. I've driven it a few times in various other sims in the past, however I don't really know it like the back of my hand, or as well as a lot of other tracks which are a lot more common in various other racing games and racing sims. I haven't really driven it all that much, so thought it would be a good kind of case in point case study here. It's a circuit that I know the least here in Assetto Corsa Competizione, which is obviously the sim that we're going to be using for this video, and I'm going to be driving the 2019 Lexus GT3 car, because my first tip for you is pick a car that you know and feel very, very comfortable driving in. You don't want to be picking a car that you've never driven before, you're not feeling comfortable with, and then having to learn a circuit on top of that as well. You're kind of just making it much more difficult for yourself and potentially overloading yourself in the whole learning process, and it'll just kind of hamper and slow you down a little bit. My second tip is to go and pick a game mode that allows the conditions to be fairly stable. I'd recommend doing this for when you're first starting to learn a circuit. So when you're kind of trying to get your bearings straight from the off, go for a game mode that has pretty static conditions and not going to be any variation in grip levels as you drive around doing lap upon lap and getting to know the track, and you're not having to readjust or account for that. So I'm using the hot lap mode here in ACC because that keeps things nice and static. Once you've got a bit more track knowledge about the circuit that you're trying to learn under your belt, then start going and looking at doing it in other game modes as well, with a little bit more variability in terms of weather conditions and track conditions. My third tip before we get rolling here is to go and look at YouTube videos of real world drivers with the onboard perspective driving the circuit that you are aiming to try and learn in your track learning session. That will give you a much better idea as to the overall layout of the circuit, the sequence of the corners and how the track generally flows, and you'll get a good indication as to roughly where braking zones are, what kind of lines real world drivers and the professionals are taking, where the apexes are, and rough apex speeds and things like that. And that will help you get a little bit of base knowledge about the track before you even jump onto it. So let's actually go and do that now, but before I do so, I'm just going to load up the aggressive setup, and I'm just going to make a quick tweak here to the bump stops just to make the car a little bit more drivable here on its baseline setup. I'm only going to make this change, so we'll just do that quickly, and that's now applied to the car. So let's get in there and let's get rolling. Now, with those first three tips, what we're going to do is we're going to fire the car up and we are going to get rolling and start driving around the track and trying to learn it. But what I'd recommend do is starting slow and building the speed up gradually. If you go in with basically 100% commitment straight from the off when you don't really know a track, you start making mistakes and you're kind of hampering the speed that you learn the circuit at, because if you're just making mistake after mistake after mistake, you're not really learning the track. You kind of get in that repetitive thing happening over and over, and the brain works best at learning new things when you do it over and over again. So if you try and eliminate mistakes straight from the off, you're not going to learn bad habits straight away for that particular track. So what we're going to do is going to start off very nice and slowly and basically look for various reference points around the track. So we're going to be looking out for brake marker boards, signage, any like lamp posts or key features around the track, such as marshal posts or color change in like barriers in the Armco, or lines that run across the width of the circuit. Basically anything that's pretty much there permanently and is static, we're going to use those as reference points. Don't use shadows. Shadows are a bad idea because shadows change as the sun obviously rises and lowers in the sky. Therefore, if you're relying on a shadow as your braking point, whilst it may be good at one part of the race, if you're doing a long endurance race, it's going to change. So for these recce laps, what I'd recommend doing is getting into a view where you get a good view of the circuit, so you can get an idea as to the various different surfaces, the types of curbs, how big they are, how wide they are, the surfaces beyond the curves, whether it's some runoff with like grasscrete, or if it's like painted tarmac, or if it's just unpainted tarmac, gravel, grass, whatever. So getting into a view like this, although it may not necessarily be your best, your usual driving view, shall I say, at least it gives you an idea as to, or shall I say, maximum visibility as to what's going on. So, as we're travelling down towards turn 1 here, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, I just killed the engine. I've just thought it. I thought I saved it there with the clutch, but evidently not. But yeah, we're on the run down towards turn 1 here at Zandvoort, and as you can see on the left-hand side, we've got our first brake marker board, the 150 marker board. Just after that, we've got a marshal post, marshal box. We've got some signage there on the left-hand side. Obviously, we've got the end of the pit wall. But most importantly, there's a 100-meter brake marker board that's just gone off the screen there on the left-hand side. Generally, for most circuits, most corners, you're going to be looking for that 100 brake marker board. That's going to be your main point of reference. There may be other ones, more optimal ones, but use 100 brake markers to start off with. So coming into turn 1, as you can see, the white line here usually dictates the edge of the track, but there's actually a little bit of tarmac beyond that, which will help us open up this first corner a little bit more. Just opens up the entry, so we'll take note of that, as we could possibly use that when coming into this first turn. Now actually coming into the apex, we can see it's actually quite a big curb with not all that much concrete beyond it before we get to the grass, so we'll probably want to stay off of that curb going through that corner and just basically apex just off of it. I do apologise, I probably will end up stalling various points throughout these throughout this recce lap here. Coming to the exit curb, it's kind of a bit of a ditch type curb here, and then there's some brickwork beyond it with the gravel on the outside there, so be a bit questionable as to whether or not we'll be using that curb upon the exit. Entirely depends on the actual line that we're taking. Approaching this little left-hand kink here, we've got another high curb here, so we probably won't be able to use that to try and open up this right-hander that we're approaching. There wasn't really, as far as I could tell, any real braking reference coming into that. Obviously we've got the skid marks and the track darkening where more rubber has been laid down in the braking zone. You can use those as references as well. But obviously just keep in mind that when you're following closely behind other cars, you may not actually be able to see the racing surface. So try and look for stuff that is to the track edges. But anyway, I think the braking point coming into this corner is going to be a little bit difficult to find something decent. For a right-handed turn, again, the inside curb is very high. We've got a sawtooth curb here on the outside, and we've got a very, very short straight before we come into a left-handed hairpin again. Not really much in the way of braking references, although there is some changes and some signage there on the barriers and on the catch fencing that we may be able to use. Coming in towards the apex and coming through the corner, we can see that the corner is actually quite heavily cambered, so that's going to be very useful for us and try and pick up on that information, because obviously those corners that have got camber in your favour is going to allow you to tuck into the apex a little bit more. Those that have got a kind of a negative camber and fall away from the apex, it's going to be a lot harder to tuck in and find that inside curb. So the inside curb here itself is pretty tall, so we may want to stay off of that one. Going through the corner, then coming to the exit, we've got a sawtooth curb with some grasscrete and then some grass beyond it, and as you saw, just wandering out there even at slow speed, the lap got invalidated, so we may need to be careful with track limits there on the outside. Anyway, picking up the pace a little bit, we come into a more high-speed section here at Zandvoort, and we come into a sequence of sweeping right, left, right corners or kinks. There's a bit of painted tarmac there on the right-hander. We may be able to use that to try and open up or shorten the circuit slightly. This curb is very, very big, quite tall. It's got like a flat lip or edge at the top of it, but because this section is quite high speed, it might be difficult to actually take that curb on the inside, so again we'll probably want to stay off of that one. And then coming through here, we've got a sawtooth curb. Obviously we've got the grass. We may be able to nip a little bit off the inside of that just to make the track slightly shorter for ourselves. Now we're coming over a crest. Obviously we've got a marshal box there on the left hand side, sawtooth curbing that we've just passed, and we've got the ambulance crew there on the left with a marshal post before we come into what is a sweeping right-hander. So again, braking points, there's a few possible references there, but we're scarce in the way of brake marker boards. And then we come into the sweeping right, where the curbing starts quite late, which would indicate to me that it's quite a late apex. We want to be clipping it in and around here before we track out wide. Where there's a lot of gravel on the outside, and there is some sawtooth curbing with some grasscrete just beyond it, but that outside curb is really quite short. Now approaching up another corner up here, and we've got a kind of a gantry over the top of the circuit, and then we've also got a white line here that spans the width of the circuit as well, so that could possibly be used as braking points for this corner that we're approaching. And coming in, that crane or digger on the left hand side probably could be used as braking points. Coming into the apex though, the curb is quite nice and low, so we can probably take quite a bit off the inside here. As you can see, we've got the painted curbing and then we've got a bit of grasscrete beyond it, but we've also got this kind of, it's almost like a half turtle shell sort of curbing. That's obviously put in there to kind of deter drivers from taking too much off the inside. So we want to avoid hitting that at high speed, because that will certainly unsettle the car. Tracking out wide, we've got a very short sawtooth curb, which isn't overly wide and it's got nothing beyond it but grass. Before we come into this right-hander here, again, not much in the way of braking points, so we may need to improvise and just kind of judge distance rather than use something pretty solid and concrete on the at the sides of the track. Coming in towards sawtooth apex curb, very, very short, and it's quite early in the corner as well, which makes me think it's quite an early apex before we track out wide. This exit curb here is very short, sawtooth, nothing really beyond it. And then we're coming into a left-handed hairpin. So coming out of that corner, we probably want to hang slightly in towards the inside of the circuit rather than tracking all the way out to the left, to try and basically set ourselves up for this left-handed hairpin a little bit better. Again, not really too much in the way of references, but we do have the ambulance and the marshals, and also the orange painted Armco at the end of that barrier, which we could use as braking points, or a braking point coming into this left-hander. And it kind of marries up with the skid markings on the circuit and the darker patches as well. Nice flat curb here on the inside, so we can make use and run that. Coming to the exit curb, sawtooth, very narrow grasscrete on the outside with some curb and grass out there, so we can't run particularly wide. Then we got ourselves a bit of a short straight before we come over the crest, and I believe this is coming down into the chicane. So we've got a 100-meter board there on the left-hand side of the screen. We've also just passed two white lines that run across the width of the circuit, so we could possibly use those as braking points as well, coming into what looks to be a right-left chicane. I'll get my words eventually. Right, sawtooth curbing here on the inside. We've got painted tarmac on the inside beyond that as well, but again, to stop drivers from abusing that too much, they've gone and stuck a half turtle shell curb on the inside, so that'll probably bounce and unsettle the car quite heavily. And then we come into the left, which is a reasonably raised curb, but there's the yellow sausage or baguette curbs there on the inside, which again, obviously to deter drivers from riding up over that curb and using the painted tarmac on the inside. Let's go out to the exit. Let's see what's out over here. Raised curb, and this is all grasscrete going out to the barrier, so we may be able to use a bit of that depending on the track limits. And then I believe this is a straight that leads down to the second to last corner. There was a 100 brake marker board and a 50 brake marker board, and then this is a sweeping right, where again the curb is nice and flat on the inside. We've got a bit of grasscrete on the inside as well. Looks like we could probably take and use some of that to our advantage to help carry the speed through. Sawtooth curb, a little bit of grasscrete on the outside there, and then gravel just beyond that. And then we come through to the final corner itself, which has a reasonably high curb. So generally what I would tend to do is do 2-3 laps of just doing that nice and slow, driving around the circuit, picking up all the various different reference points that you can use, get an understanding of the curbs and what is beyond those curbs, the kind of like the track limits, whether there's grasscrete out there, whether there's tarmac, painted tarmac, or whether it's grass or gravel or whatever. Once you've done a few laps of those, you can then get yourself back into the driving view that you typically run and do a couple of laps at moderate pace. So bring your speed up a little bit from what you were doing before, but more focus on just trying to get the line through the corner right, rather than actually, you know, trying to get the speeds that you would be going, trying to nail the braking points or the apex speeds or anything else like that. Just focus on getting the line right. And at this point you can also test some of the curbs as well. So for example, if I was to go and test that curb on the inside, as you saw, even at that speed, which isn't quite full racing speed, the car raised and bumped up quite a bit and would have unsettled the car if we were going a little bit quicker. So straight from the off, I'm obviously taking notes as to what curbs I can take, what curbs I can't take. That will probably unsettle the car too much, as we already said on the previous lap. But basically, do a couple of laps of this. Just focus on trying to get the right line at a nice steady speed without any mistakes. Just test a few of the curbs, figure out which ones you can take and which ones you can't. And then once you build that knowledge up, after you've done a few laps, you can then gradually begin to build that speed up. Because again, as I said at the start of the video, the brain works and learns best when it repeats the same thing over and over again. If you go gun-ho straight from the off and try to go through the corners as quickly as you possibly can straight from the off, you're very highly likely to make mistakes, and you just end up repeating the same mistake over and over again. You're hampering your ability to learn the circuit and learn it as quickly as possible. One thing that you may also notice is I'm not running with a driving line assist. Quite a few people try to lean on that assist and basically use it as their kind of way of learning a circuit, but you're never truly learning a circuit using the driving line assist, because when it's there, you're always driving to the line. You're focusing on that and focusing that you're taking the right line there, and if it's one of those lines that changes colour as well, depending on your speed, to help guide you to the correct speeds to go through the corner, you're relying on the line to tell you the correct speed through the corner rather than actually learning the circuit. What it also means is your eyes are focusing on that line, and when you don't have that line or can't see the line, such in racing situations where you're in close proximity to other cars, they may be obscuring the line and preventing you from being able to see it. You're therefore more likely to make mistakes. Whereas if you turn the line off straight from the beginning and get your eyes up and looking at the edges of the circuit for actual reference points, even when you're in those racing situations with other cars, you've got various racing reference points to bounce off of and use if, say, one is obscured or something like that. So yeah, try and avoid using the driving line assist where possible, because it does hinder you and you do rely more on that rather than actually learning the circuit properly. It also means that when it comes to turning that line off, you're almost starting from square one once again, and you're having to almost relearn the circuit. Yes, you'll know the sequence of corners, and you have an idea as to the apex speeds that you should be taking, but for reference points such as braking points or turning points or something like that, you're going to struggle a little bit more and have to relearn those. So doing it straight from the off will allow you to learn the circuit a bit quicker than if you had it on. One other thing that you could do is also run with a few AI and just kind of follow them as well. They may give you an idea as to the lines that you should be taking, roughly where to be braking, the apex speeds and things like that. But generally, when you first come to a circuit, this I think is the best way to learn a track and get yourself up to speed quickly. Is just go out by yourself on your own, just take it nice and slow, slowly build up the laps. So start off with your recce laps, pick up all those reference points, look at all those curbs, do 2 or 3 laps just crawling around the circuit and just memorizing all those reference points, where they are, the flow and the sequence of corners, and looking at the camber and the changes in road surface and if that's going to be anything that influences on the car. Once you've kind of done 2 or 3 laps of that, again, just build up the speed and just try and get the line dialed down and get that right. Once you've got the line and the general flow kind of there, and you're feeling fairly happy and confident that you know the sequence of corners, and where you are going around the track, you can start to pick up the pace a little bit more. Again, go a little bit reserved, so don't go completely flat out, but just gradually build that pace up over time, over the span of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 laps or so. So here, like, I'll brake a little bit earlier than the 100-meter board. Just get a feel for a rough speed that you should be taking through the apexes of the corners, finding out which curbs you should be taking, just taking it nice and steady, and just trying to avoid making mistakes where possible. Figure out the lines, hooking up, say, a late apex, testing to see if a late apex works better than a mid-corner apex. Whether you have to lift through particular corners or whether you can take them flat out, but obviously if you can't take them flat out, well, just gradually build up to the possibility of being able to take it flat out rather than trying to test that straight from the off. It's all about that gradual build up and getting that repetition into your brain and getting the brain learning how to drive a circuit correctly straight from the off rather than making mistakes and then trying to undo those mistakes over time. So even here, I'm not pushing at 100%, just slowly building up the pace, just taking it nice and steady. I'm just trying to figure out the correct lines, which curbs I can and can't take, and just generally what the car is kind of doing even at those speeds. So like here, very nice and comfortable to take that inside curb because it was nice and flat. I don't think this last corner is quite completely flat out, but we'll gradually build up the speed to eventually test it. And we may find that before we get to that point, we may find the optimum pace to be taken through that corner. Didn't quite brake properly there for turn 1, hence why I was wide from the apex. Just get the line right, just build that speed up, and then slowly piece the circuit together. Do it gradually over time, and that will give you an advantage over those who haven't learnt a circuit properly or have done it the wrong method or are still trying to use the driving line assist and relying on that to help guide them around the track. So braking a little bit too early there for that corner, so I know I can brake a little bit later. Same with here, although the car was getting away from me a little bit there, so possibly not on the most optimal line, possibly braking a little bit too late and a little bit too hard. Car wasn't quite settled or something like that. Coming to a chicane here, just taking that curb a bit tighter to the corner this time round than last time. Let's just build the speed up through this final turn, just making sure that I'm hooking up the apexes even if I'm having to breathe on the throttle a little bit. So let's now, once you kind of got that idea and got yourself up to speed, then you can start pushing a little bit harder. So 100 brake marker board, that was one too many stabs on the brake there, hence why the car started to rotate a little bit. Trying to hook up that late apex. Third gear through the right hander, not the best line though. Second gear here, trying to bring the car back for a late-ish apex to try and really get a good drive coming off the exit here onto what isn't necessarily a straight but a faster section of the circuit. Getting the line right, can take that completely flat out, braking at the end of the curb, car just moving around a little bit going over that crest. Which is also another thing you should take note of, is how the car is responding to changes in undulation around the circuit. Going over crest, the car is going to get light, it's going to try and brake away from you. If you're going down through a dip, then the suspension may compress and you will get a slight boost in grip for a short moment. So it's taking note of things like those as you drive around the circuit and build the speed gradually as well. It's all about that gradual speed build up and doing it in conditions that you're comfortable with. Once you've kind of got yourself up to speed, go and take yourself into racing situations. Start playing around with various other lines as well, as if you're trying to overtake someone. So go for that like inside line, kind of play around with those sort of scenarios. Even if you don't necessarily have the car there, just try and figure out what kind of lines are going to be the best and practice as if there was a car alongside you. So for example, turn 1, come to the inside here, figure out where is the latest point that you can brake for the corner and if you can still make that turn even on that line. And practice those sort of things, so when it does actually happen in a proper racing scenario, you're prepared, you know what roughly to expect, and that may give you a little bit of an advantage over the driver that you're trying to overtake and pass. So over time, been gradually building up the speed, but I'm not 100% there yet with Zandvoort, still learning it, still trying to find the optimum lines and hit that with consistency, and that's one of the key things, is keep doing this until you're consistent around the circuit with every corner. Don't necessarily push 100% as I've been saying, and just go for 85-90% of your capability and just focus on learning the circuit and being consistent, and that will help you learn over time. But I think I've pretty much covered everything, so I'm just going to finish this video off with one last flying lap, which I'll go quiet for, so enjoy. So the first part of the lap was pretty good. The last sector or so was pretty scruffy. But either way, I was basically a demonstration of how I learn new circuits, or circuits that I don't or haven't really had much experience in driving in the past in various other sims. So I'd recommend using this method to get yourself up to speed as quickly as possible. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I possibly can. If you enjoyed the video or learnt something here, give the video a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this, feel free to consider subscribing. And if you hit that bell notification, you'll be notified of every single video that I end up putting up on the YouTube channel here. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I shall catch you in the next one. But until then, have fun, stay safe, and take care.